The year was 1880, and the Second Anglo-Afghan War continued to grind forward with no clear end in sight. Up to that point, the campaign had largely unfolded in Britain's favor. British forces had overpowered numerous Afghan tribes and seized control of several key cities and towns throughout the country, including Jalalabad. Following a succession of military engagements across the region, British commanders placed Abdul Rahman Khan on the throne as Emir of Afghanistan, aiming to establish a cooperative and manageable administration in Kabul, one that would serve British imperial interests in the region without requiring a prolonged military presence. However, not everyone was prepared to accept this arrangement. Ayub Khan, son of the former Emir Sher Ali and the regional governor of Herat, flatly refused to recognize the British-backed political settlement. Rather than submit to what he viewed as a foreign imposition, he asserted his own rightful claim to the Afghan throne. Drawing on a strong foundation of support from his Western power base, discontented tribal factions, and fighters who had grown deeply resentful of foreign interference, Ayub assembled a formidable fighting force and set his sights on Kandahar, a strategically vital city in the south and one of the most significant British-held strongholds in the country at the time. Estimates placed Ayub Khan's assembled army at somewhere between 10,000 and 12,000 men at the outset, though that figure is believed to have climbed considerably as tribal volunteers joined the column during its long overland march toward Kandahar. The cause had captured the imagination of many across the country, with fighters flocking to Ayub's banner, viewing the campaign as a struggle for Afghan sovereignty against a foreign occupying power. Tasked with halting this advance before it could reach Kandahar, General George Burrows assembled a combined British and Indian force of approximately 2,500 men. His contingent included cavalry from units such as the Bombay Light Cavalry, a modest artillery battery, and various infantry detachments. His orders were straightforward: intercept Ayub Khan's army before it could threaten Kandahar, and either engage it in the field or force it to withdraw. From the very beginning, however, Burrows faced a difficult hand. His troops were already worn down from prior operations, supplies were running thin, and the intelligence reaching headquarters regarding Ayub's movements was fragmentary and often contradictory. In an early attempt to disrupt the Afghan advance, Burrows moved to seize artillery pieces that had been abandoned by a mutinous Afghan regiment at Girishk. The guns were captured successfully, but the operation did little to slow Ayub Khan and arguably strengthened his determination to press forward. Burrows subsequently fell back to a holding position at Kuski Nakud, situated roughly halfway between Girishk and Kandahar, where he could monitor the situation and respond depending on whether Ayub's force veered toward Ghazni or continued on toward Kandahar. He remained there for approximately 1 week, during which time the captured artillery was absorbed into his force, with British infantrymen reassigned as gunners to operate the additional pieces. A more serious problem, however, was Burrows's fundamental miscalculation about the nature of the enemy he would face. He labored under the assumption that Ayub Khan commanded a poorly organized and inadequately equipped rabble, fighters who could be scattered with a show of disciplined British firepower and professional soldiering. This assumption would prove catastrophically wrong. On the afternoon of July 26th, reports arrived indicating that Afghan forces were closing on the Maywand Pass, just a few miles from Burrows's position. He resolved to move forward at dawn the next morning, expecting at most to encounter a forward vanguard of Ayub's army rather than the full strength of his fighting force. Scouts had returned with reports suggesting only limited enemy movement in the area, and this badly flawed intelligence reinforced Burrows's existing confidence. What neither he nor his officers appreciated was the staggering scale of what awaited them. By the time the British column was marching toward the village of Maywand, Ayub Khan's combined force had swelled to an estimated 25,000 men, more than 10 times what Burrows had prepared to face. Back on the field, Burrows had positioned his men for what he anticipated would be a manageable engagement. His chosen ground, however, was deeply problematic. Open and exposed, offering little natural cover, no meaningful defensive terrain features, and no secure line of retreat should the situation deteriorate. His units were spread across an extended front with vulnerable flanks on either side, and his cavalry lacked both the numbers and the positioning to screen or respond effectively to Afghan maneuvers across the surrounding open landscape. The battle opened with a prolonged artillery exchange. For approximately 3 hours, both sides traded salvos in a relentless bombardment, the British guns working hard to absorb the weight of the approaching Afghan formations. Then, at a decisive moment, the British artillery on the left flank exhausted its ammunition and was compelled to pull back temporarily to resupply. The gap this withdrawal created was immediately and ruthlessly exploited by the Afghans. Afghan infantry surged forward against the now exposed British left. The Indian regiments holding that sector buckled under the assault, and the collapse spread rapidly across the line in a surging wave. The 66th Regiment of Foot, caught in the momentum of the disintegrating flank, was swept along with it into the general retreat. The British force was now in open, disorganized retreat. The battery of the Royal Horse Artillery performed a remarkable rearguard action, holding its position to cover the withdrawal of the entire brigade while every other unit fell back around it. The battery continued firing until Afghan fighters were barely 15 yards away before attempting to limber up and withdraw. One section was overrun before it could escape. Amid the chaos of the collapsing retreat, a small group of soldiers, men from the 66th Regiment of Foot alongside troops from the Bombay Grenadiers, made a final, desperate last stand inside a walled garden on the edge of the village of Keeg. Outnumbered by staggering margins and nearly out of ammunition, approximately 11 officers and 164 men resolved to hold their ground rather than flee or surrender. When their cartridges were finally exhausted, the men fixed bayonets and threw themselves into hand-to-hand combat in the cramped confines of the garden. Encircled and fighting on every side, they continued, until virtually every man among them was dead or mortally wounded. When Ayub Khan's fighters swept over the position, they found themselves moved by the extraordinary ferocity and courage the defenders had displayed. As a gesture of respect, some of the surviving wounded were spared from execution, and the fallen were buried with a degree of honor rarely granted to enemy dead. Only a small number of men from that final stand are known to have come out alive. Across the entire engagement, more than 900 British and Indian soldiers were killed, with many more wounded or taken prisoner during the chaotic withdrawal to Kandahar. The Afghan side also suffered enormously. Approximately 3,500 of Ayub Khan's fighters lost their lives, reflecting just how fierce and costly the fighting had been even in British defeat. The Battle of Maywand became one of the defining episodes in Afghan national memory, celebrated for generations as a remarkable triumph over a powerful foreign occupier. Though General Frederick Roberts would later lead a relief column from Kabul and decisively defeat Ayub Khan at the subsequent Battle of Kandahar, the catastrophe at Maywand left a deep and lasting wound on British military pride, a sobering reminder of the true cost of underestimating an enemy fighting on their own land and for their own people.